This weekend, Pope Francis has asked us all to pray for the upcoming Synod on the Family, which begins next weekend at St. Peter's in the Vatican. And the Synod process actually takes about a year. Various cardinals and bishops meet, and they'll begin meeting next weekend to discuss an agenda and issues to be studied so that they could prepare a document to give to Pope Francis. And it will conclude next fall. And this Synod on the Family gives Pope Francis an opportunity to make his first apostolic visit to the United States to celebrate the World Day of Families next fall in Philadelphia. So keep that intention in your prayers. The entire point of the New Testament is to demonstrate that Jesus Christ is Lord of the universe, and to him all of us owe our allegiance. And every gospel that you read points in that direction, helping us to understand why and how Jesus is the Lord's anointed, the Messiah. And in this gospel passage, Jesus is taking on the chief priest and the elders of the people. Now, if you go back a few verses before in this gospel passage, the chief priest and the elders approached Jesus when he was in the temple teaching. And they asked him, "By what right are you doing these things? Who gave you this authority?" And Jesus shoots right back at them and says, "I'll answer that question only if you answer this question. Was John's baptism from God or not?" And then Matthew tells us they debated among themselves, and they realized that if they say John's baptism was from God, Jesus will ask, "Well, why didn't you believe him?" And if we say it was not from God, the crowd who regarded John as a prophet will turn against us. So they respond to Jesus, "We do not know." Jesus, with that simple question, turns the table on them, and he literally silences them. Sometimes it's a way to make your point, to end an argument, to bring a debate to a conclusion. I think of the story of Winston Churchill. He was at a state dinner, and he was seated next to a woman who did not like him. And halfway through the dinner, the woman said, "Mr. Churchill, if you were my wife, I would put poison in your tea." And he looked at her and he said, "Madam, if you were my wife, I would drink the tea." Kind of turns the tables on the conversation. I remember years back, one Sunday, we were having something over in the hall, and it involved cupcakes. And I said to one of the little ones, a 4-year-old, I said, "Now when you go over there, make sure you save me a cupcake." So afterwards I got over there, and of course, with all the little kids, all the cupcakes were gone, but there he was with a cupcake with chocolate icing in his hand. And I said, "That was the last cupcake, and that was mine." And he kind of looked at the cupcake, and he kind of looked at me, and he went, "Here." Completely shut me up. So, and I like to say that young man is 18 years old. He's now incarcerated, but actually, no. But this is kind of what Jesus does to the chief priest and the elders. He silences them. He completely shuts their argument down. So we might want to ask, what were they after exactly? Well, what they really wanted to say to Jesus was, "Who do you think you are? The Messiah, God's anointed?" Because only the Messiah could claim authority over the temple. And in his absence, it was, according to the Mosaic law, left up to the chief priest and the elders of the people. And we know that Jesus was claiming authority over the temple. We have the great scene where he cleanses the temple. I'm sure that caused a lot of resentment from the high priest and the elders. And so rather than ask Jesus this question head on, they just really can't, because they know it'll have all sorts of implications. So they beat around the bush trying to get Jesus to either trap himself in a blasphemous statement or to deny it. Of course, they could expose him then as a fraud. And so Jesus asked them this question. about the two sons. Which son did as the father expected? The one who said yes but didn't, or the one who said no and then eventually did? I think from this we could see where Jesus is taking this story. The tax collectors and the prostitutes were the ones who rejected God's will, rejected God's sovereignty in their life. But when they heard John's preaching, they repented. They were the ones who said no, but then eventually went and embraced God's will. Whereas the chief priest and the elders were the people who were saying, we do God's will. We follow the law. And yet, when they heard John's preaching and they saw the effects of it, the conversion of sinners, they still refused to believe. So they were the ones who said yes, but eventually failed to do what God had asked. And it's this moment that Jesus, with one master stroke, embarrasses them and silences them. But it's at this point of the story we should pay the most attention, because the parable has its application to us as well, to all of us who try our best to be religiously observant people. Kind of hits us up against the head. Are we the son who says yes, but eventually refuses to do the Father's will? Is our external religious practices just a cover for a very hard heart? A heart that refuses to embrace God's will? It's a question we have to ask ourselves. Certainly Jesus turned the table on the chief priest and the elders. He can do the same to any one of us unless we follow him from our heart. The Pharisees, the Sadducees, the chief priests looked like they were doing God's will. They were worshiping in the temple, they were keeping up appearances, but they refused still to believe John's message. Not only his message about repentance, but also about the coming Messiah. Messiah who in fact was standing in their midst at that moment, calling them to account, and they simply didn't like it. I think the challenge of this gospel for us is twofold. First, to make sure that we are responding to Jesus, allowing him to confront us at any point where we've been like the second son, who said yes to God, while in fact we go off in a different direction. And that's important because we don't want to be hypocrites, but we want to be honest and people of integrity in our religious faith. The other point we should focus on is, what would Jesus followers today be doing that would challenge the powers of the present world that Jesus is indeed its rightful Lord? That's what Jesus did to the chief priest and the elders. He challenged them to see him as God's Messiah. So what should we be doing that the world will ask us, by what authority or right are you doing these things? Remember, once I was asked that question on a pro-life protest. Someone came up to me and said, what gives you the right to stop a woman from having an abortion? And I thought, Jesus Christ gives me the right. Now, that's not how you want to phrase it, but you do want to, at that point, as Jesus did, begin to share stories about how God has worked through Jesus, how God has raised him up, as the letter to the Philippians tells us, and anointed him and appointed him King of the universe. And so by sharing these gospel stories, by witnessing to who Jesus Christ is, why he has authority and power over us, why we owe our allegiance to him, we could help others to come and accept his lordship in their lives.